Hey, Sapna, how are you?
Ah, yeah, good. Ah,
I am very good. Thanks for asking.
yeah,
Same to you. Well, thank you. It's exciting to be here with you. I've enjoyed, I was on your website. I was looking at your work. Like I said, I think this is going to be fun, and I hope our conversation makes a positive difference in the members of your audience. Great. Sure. So I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, one of the larger cities here in the United States. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to on a basketball scholarship, despite having 3 knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this is long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain. That was the good news. The bad news was that I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Professionally, as I said, started out at Wendy's, and then I went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. Then I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. But for the last 12 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's in the military here in the United States. Sure. So most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun, and it affects the melanin, the pigment in our skin. I have a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. Mine appeared on the bottom of my foot back in 2012. And that type of cancer, that type of melanoma has nothing to do with sun exposure. But back when I was diagnosed, like I said, in 2012, I was basically given a death sentence. I was told that I would more than likely not live longer than 2 years, that the doctors had nothing to offer me in terms of treatment. They could offer surgery. If it was someplace where they could cut it out, they could do that. But they had no therapies, no medications, no treatments that they could offer me. So I thought, well, you gave me a death sentence. Maybe I could turn that death sentence into a life sentence. And that's what I've been trying to do for the last 12 years now. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a death sentence, his life is over. They're at least from our earthly forms, that there's nothing more we can do here. A life sentence for me was more, how can I live? how can I find a reason, a purpose to live? And I remembered back when my father was dying of cancer. My father had end-stage breast cancer back in the 1980s, and they really didn't know how to treat a man with breast cancer back then. And they told him pretty much to go home and die. And I remember he lived another 3.5 years. And I believe he did because he had a purpose and he loved real estate. He was in real estate his entire life. And he actually worked up till 2 weeks before he died. And I sort of tucked that in the back of my mind and said, when it's my time in the barrel, so to speak, I need to have that purpose. I mean, I could sit around and say, oh, woe is me. Why did I get this disease? I'm going to die. Or I could say, okay, I have no idea when I'm going to die. And doctors have no idea when you're going to die. Doctors just play the odds. They know that a person in a certain physical type of situation with a certain type of cancer at a certain stage is going to probably live X number of years. But what the doctors don't know is they don't know that you want to see your son graduate from high school or walk your daughter down the aisle on her wedding day or vacation somewhere with your wife after you retire. The doctors don't know your heart, your mind, and your soul. And those are the things that rule your physical body. And so I wasn't willing to accept what the doctor said. I wanted to live. I wanted to do as much living as I possibly could. And I always say, I think I've done more living in the 12 years that I've been dying of cancer than I've done in my entire life. And I've had a pretty good life up to the point where I developed cancer. So I wanted to get out there, find that purpose, and really try to squeeze every ounce of life I could have with whatever time I have left. Sure. Yeah. Interferon was a horrible, nasty, debilitating drug for me. And it was something that my oncologist put me on, as she used to say, to try to kick the can down the road. That, again, we've got nothing to offer you, so we're going to put you on this to try to buy you as much time as we can for additional therapies to become available. I took a weekly injection of interferon, and it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having a really horrible case of the flu every week for 5 years. And as I said, that wasn't a cure. That was just, we're trying to kick the can down the road. And there was many times during that 5-year period where I was so sick of being sick that I literally prayed to die. I never thought about committing suicide or anything like that, but I certainly was talking to God about, there are sort of two parts of life. There's the living part and there's the not dying part. And I really, during the 5-year course of interferon, felt I was in the not dying part. I didn't feel I was contributing anything to my family, to society, to my friends at all. And so I was like, look, God, I'm not doing anything here. I'm not being productive, or at least I didn't feel I was. And I said, please take me out of this. Let me die. Let me go home. Well, obviously, God didn't do that. But what he did was give me the strength to literally get up the next day. My goal was literally to survive today. And if I wake up tomorrow morning, I'll figure out a way to survive that day. I had no long-term ambitions. I had no long-term goals. I was literally living day to day with the cancer and with the drug. And so it was one of the hardest 5-year periods I had ever experienced in my life.
You gotta do the
That's a great question. I wonder that sometimes myself. You know, a lot of times we talk to ourselves about winning the day. And sometimes winning the day for me was literally just getting the energy to get out of bed and make it to the couch. Or if I was really feeling good, maybe I could throw a load of laundry in the wash machine to help my wife out or something like that. It was literally a mind game. It was willing my body with my mind to get up and to keep trying and to keep moving forward and just whatever that day looked like. And I mean, there were many times where my wife was like, just sit with us at the dinner table. We understand that you don't feel like eating and things like that, but just sit with the family. I would try to do that. I would actually do my best, but then I would get a whiff of something that smelled terrible to me, and I would end up having to go throw up. I didn't feel I was participating in life. I just felt I was marking a place. I was marking time, with the idea being that hopefully somewhere down the road, the thing that I worried about the most was, am I just marking this time and then I'm going to die at the end of it, where we're not going to get to a point where there's something that they can do to help me or help my cancer. It was just a day in, day out mental struggle to try to get to the next day.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It was incredibly hard. It was hard on me physically, but it was also hard on me to watch my family have to participate in that with me, you know, to support me and to do what they could to help me to get through that. You know, the weeks were kind of sort of in cycles, you know, where I would take the injection on Saturday, usually before I went to bed, and then Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday I would have a terrible case of the flu, and then Wednesday, Thursday, you know, you start to feel better. You would think Friday would be my best day because it's the day before I take the next injection. But it was interesting. The more I took interferon, the more it was almost like my body knew that on Saturday this was coming again. So Friday it would start to sort of get ready for, well, here it comes again. So there were really never good days during that whole week. There were better days than others, absolutely, but there were never days where I felt, boy, this is a great day. I feel great. I never felt great for a 5-year period. I always say that, you know, the physical part of having cancer have been hard for me, but they're things that I always felt I could handle. What was hardest for me was to watch my family be there and go through the struggle with me, knowing that there was not a lot they could do to alleviate my pain, to alleviate my discomfort. So it was harder for me to watch what they were going through than it actually was for me to go through it. But I absolutely will tell you that I would not be here talking with you today if it hadn't been for my family, you know, especially my wife. There have been times where she has noticed things. You mentioned the interferon. Well, at the end of my interferon therapy, I ended up in the intensive care unit at the hospital with a body temperature of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. That's usually a temperature you're not alive. But my wife had seen me and said, you know, you're slurring your speech, you're doing things. And she asked the nurse to take my temperature. And the nurse kind of dismissed her like, well, we just took it. It was fine. And she said, no, you need to take it again. And the nurse took it and it was 104. And she ran out to get the doctors. When they came back, you know, less than 5 minutes later, it was 108. If my wife had not noticed what I was going through, then there's a good chance I would not have survived that incident. She was able to notice something and catch it early and allow the doctors to come in and do whatever they did. I don't remember it. I just remember waking up in the intensive care unit, whatever they did to save my life. I mean, it was hard. It was very much like a roller coaster. I mean, there were days where I felt I was in control of my emotions. And then there are days where I would just cry for no reason. The waterworks would come on it, and I would cry if I would read something that was very emotional or watch something on the television that was emotional. So it was very much a roller coaster, kind of an up and down from my emotions. And I've always been an individual that felt I was in control of my emotions. I needed to be in a lot of ways for the jobs that I had. It was hard to be vulnerable like that, to be authentic, for lack of a better word. Like, this is me. I'm sorry, I just might start crying. I mean, I used to carry a pack of tissues, a pack of Kleenex around with me just in case that happened. We talk about the physical, the mental, and the emotional. I mean, all three of those are things that you need to look at when you're dealing with any kind of an illness. I know even today, when I'm on the drug that I'm on currently for the tumors that I have in my lungs, when I take that drug, it absolutely gets me to a point where I'm much more emotional than I would be without the drug. So you just realize that that's part of the disease, that's part of the process of trying to help you, and you are who you are. We all have our limitations and things like that. I don't even know if it's a limitation. It's just something that I have to deal with as part of my situation in life. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I have to stop the interferon because it's too toxic to my body at that time. And almost immediately after stopping the interferon, the cancer comes back in the exact same spot on my foot where it had presented 5 years earlier. And that necessitated having my left foot amputated. I had to learn how to walk again. I was lucky in that my orthopedic surgeon worked with a foot specialist. So I was able to keep my heel and my ankle. So everything in front of my heel and my ankle, they amputated. So I still had a heel, which made it a little bit easier for me to walk, but I also didn't have the toes to be able to balance and that. So I had to go through extensive physical therapy to learn how to walk again. It was difficult, but I didn't think it was anything that was, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I was lucky in a way because they originally were going to amputate my leg below the knee. And so I felt incredibly fortunate. They were able to not amputate my leg and keep my heel and my ankle and just take everything in front of my ankle. So I actually felt, I know this kind of sounds crazy, but I actually felt lucky that I didn't lose my leg below the knee. And I think that would have been much more difficult to learn how to walk again. So emotionally, I think anytime you lose a body part, I mean, something that I'd had for my entire life, and now it's gone. And I mean, there were still times after I had the amputation where I could feel my toes. It's like, my toes are there. Well, no, they're not. They're not there. Logically, your toes aren't there, but you can still feel them because those nerves that have been going to your brain for your entire life, they just don't stop. They still think those toes are there. It was very interesting. It was, sometimes I would laugh and like, oh, I can feel my toes. Well, I know they're not there. So I would sort of laugh at it. I mean, the physical part was just learning how to walk again. And then the emotional part was, I kind of had this disability in my mind, but when you would put a shoe on and you'd put the prosthetic on, nobody knew that I didn't have a foot. Nobody knew that. I knew it. And so it was more what I was projecting in my own mind about, well, you're disabled now, you don't have a foot. But I mean, it didn't stop me. I mean, I still drove, I still went to the gym and worked out. I still rode a bike. I still did things like that. You just had to figure out a different way to live your life based on what I call the little limitation that I had. Yeah, it certainly was. It was terrible. You know, I found out in one afternoon, right around dinner time, that I was going to have my leg amputated above the knee because the disease had progressed. My entire lower leg was full of cancer. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I still have, which I'm still being treated for. But I remember my orthopedic surgeon had to get special permission from the hospital to actually do the surgery because, as you mentioned, the hospitals were pretty much shut down. They were dealing with COVID patients. And, you know, they questioned my doctor, well, why do you have to do the surgery? Well, I had a tumor kind of in my ankle area that grew large enough that it broke my shin. It broke my leg. You know, the doctor was saying, well, I can't put it in a cast. It's not going to heal. It's full of cancer. We need to do the surgery. And so the morning of the surgery, I will never forget this. My wife literally dropped me off at the hospital. She was not allowed to be with me. I was not allowed to have anyone with me during that time where they were prepping me for surgery. And I remember a nurse was waiting for me. I got in a wheelchair. She wheeled me back to the pre-op area, which is this very large room that's warded off by curtains and that, into about 30 different smaller rooms, all designed to be prepping or preparing patients for all different kinds of surgery. And I was the only person in this great big room. It was me, a nurse, and an anesthesiology resident. Now, if my leg hadn't been broken, I probably would have run. I probably would have said, I can't deal with this. I've got to get out of here. But I remember my wife said to me when she dropped me off, she's like, I don't know what to do. And I said, I guess the only thing I can recommend is park somewhere in the parking lot and pray and wait for my doctor to call you after the surgery. And I was told when I went into surgery that more than likely I would be in the hospital for 10 days to 2 weeks to learn how to deal with walking and functioning without a leg. I was going through all kinds of physical and occupational therapy. And I remember they came in almost immediately after surgery when I was in my room and said, we're going to send you home after 48 hours. I'm like, what? Like, you just cut my leg off. You're going to send me home after 48 hours. And the therapists were frustrated. I was frustrated. I still didn't have my pain under control at that time. But yeah, 48 hours after having my leg amputated above the knee, they sent me home. And fortunately, I had become friends with an occupational therapist who agreed to come to our house after work and help my wife arrange the house so that I could function with a walker and with a wheelchair. And fortunately for her, we got the house to a place where I was able to get around, and I'm still able to get around, fortunately, because of the efforts that she did for us. Scary, to be honest with you. I didn't know what to expect. I really wasn't comfortable using a walker. When you lose your leg, your entire balance is off, and I was concerned about falling and things like that. So, and at the time I have a wheelchair that has been made for me. At that time, we were using a rental wheelchair, which really didn't fit me in terms of being long enough or extending out far enough to support my stump. How do I go to the bathroom? How do I get in and out of bed? How do I dress myself? How do I shave? Because standing on one leg, it's amazing. You stand on two legs, no problem. You stand on one leg, that leg gets very tired very quickly. because it's supporting all your weight. And so it was just a matter of figuring things out. And I knew I would. I knew I would figure it out. I never felt hopeless or helpless. I knew I was going to make mistakes, and I would have to learn from those mistakes so that I didn't do it again. And I was just trying to do things that didn't put me in harm's way or in jeopardy, or doing something that would get me hurt and things like that. So it was just figuring it out. I would kind of laugh sometimes that, well, I wonder if this is how a 2-year-old feels when they're learning to walk again. They kind of don't have balance and they fall over and they laugh and that. I'm like, well, I'm 6'8". I can't fall over because I'll probably get hurt if I fall from this height. So I'm going to figure it out with the help of my wife, and our daughter was in school at the time, and this occupational therapist, and they were great. They figured it out with me, and here I am 4 years later, and fortunately still going strong. It was very hard. I have a prosthetic leg. I don't like it. I don't feel comfortable in it. I think everybody thinks you just put it on. I mean, once you learn to walk and you go, and that's not the case. I mean, you put on initially a liner that's about 1/4 of an inch thick. It's a rubberized type of material. It's non-porous. It doesn't breathe with your skin. And then you put on what they call socks, which look like sweat socks, gym socks, and you put it over your liner and your stump to get it to the point where it's wide enough that it fits in the socket of your prosthetic leg. The problem with that is, as you walk with your prosthetic leg, your stump shrinks. So you constantly have to take your pants off, take your stump or your prosthetic off, put more socks on, put your prosthetic back on, put your pants back on. So it's not like you just put it on and go. And I remember when I was in physical therapy, I would come home and I would literally get in the bathtub because that liner that doesn't breathe, that doesn't allow sweat to evaporate, would be full of sweat, would be full of water. So I would have to take it off in the bathtub because I would just dump sweat out of it. I know that sounds kind of gross, but that's literally the way it was. So it's very difficult, at least I found, to use. And I'm more comfortable in a wheelchair getting around. I live pretty much on the first floor of our house. I sleep there, I eat there, I work there, and I don't go upstairs or downstairs because it's just not something that I'm comfortable doing. And that, it took a long time to get comfortable, to get my balance, to get things in order. And I think part of that was my age. As I'm older, I was in my 60s when I lost my leg. To get that balance situation, you do not realize when you have 2 legs and you can stand on those legs, how you don't even think about your balance. But when you don't have that, it's just amazing how off balance you really are. I mean, I don't think my family or my friends really saw me any differently. Nobody was really, oh, I don't want to be around you because you don't have a leg or you're in a wheelchair and things like that. There was never any ostracizing of me because I was different. So I felt lucky with that. But again, it was, like today, for example, when I go for my treatments, my wife has to put my wheelchair in the back of the car. The wheelchair is not liked, and she has to drive me to treatment and then come and pick me up. And this is an every 3-week process for an entire week. So my family is actively involved. I mean, my wife does everything for me. She makes the bed, she does the laundry, she does the cooking, in addition to working. She has a full-time job. So if there's a definition of a saint, it would be her and everything that she does for me. Our daughter is now married, but still very, very much involved. I have 2 brothers, and they call me all the time. You don't do this. You don't survive and you don't thrive in the abstract. It's absolutely, you do it with the people that are willing to be there with you. I would not be here today if it hadn't been for the other people that have helped me along this route. Oh, I know. I absolutely know that. I thank God every day for her and the people that I have in my life that have been there for me. I could not do this by myself. I need other people to help me. Yeah, I mean, I had these tumors diagnosed in the middle of COVID. So I literally I hunkered down in my house. I didn't go anywhere. Nobody came to visit or anything like that. It was just my wife and I. It was a situation where I had to go to the hospital for treatment for those tumors. Very used to wearing a mask. I still wear a mask today when I go out of the house and go to treatment and things. I think disease in general tends to isolate us. I think it isolates us from our friends initially and then our family. And if we let it isolates us from ourselves, from who we are, from the things that we enjoy, the things that we like to do in our lives. And I think you have to be careful that it doesn't isolate you to the point where you're not participating in life anymore. I like doing things like this, talking to you on podcasts or writing or doing things like that, finding that purpose that I mentioned when I learned that from my father when he was dying of cancer. And so I spend a lot of time with people on podcasts from other parts of the world. It's difficult for me to travel, but when I get to talk to people in England or Australia or Africa or India or China, it's fun for me because it's a way of traveling without having to expose myself to other diseases and things like that. I have tumors in my lungs. There's nothing I can do about that, but I try not to let that stop me from trying to also live my life. I talk about what I call my 3 F's, which are faith, family, and friends. I have a very strong faith in God. I remember when I had these tumors in my lungs and I had my leg amputated, my doctor showed me my CAT scan result. And I have no medical background. I don't know how to read a CAT scan, but you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces of my lungs. I was coughing up green, bloody phlegm. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive? And I'll never forget this. My doctor put his head down. He shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know because you shouldn't have been, which said to me that God's not done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about the dying. Spend more time focused on the living portion of my life now. And then my family. I've mentioned my family a lot. I'll give you another kind of funny story, which is actually a true story. When I had these tumors, my doctor said, I want to start you on chemotherapy. And we were 8 years into this cancer fight. And I looked at him and said, is it going to save my life? And he said, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I told him, I said, look, if the outcome is going to be the same, if I'm going to die, I would rather die not going through all that ugliness of chemotherapy. I said, but I'll go home and talk to my family about it. And so I go home and I start telling my wife and daughter what's going on. And my daughter's like, all right, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that. We sit around the kitchen table and individually talk about how we all feel about me having chemo. And then when we're done with that, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. And I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do? But I remembered when I was back in the police academy, learning how to be a police officer, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people that we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques, to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I took chemotherapy not because I wanted to, but because my family wanted me to, and I love them more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. It was the drug that got me to the current clinical trial drug that I'm on. There were people that I was 100% sure would be there for me if anything really bad happened. And several of those people kind of backed away. We're like, ooh, Tery, you're a young man, you've got this cancer, it's a terminal disease. We can't deal with it, which surprised. And then the other thing that surprised me is people that I never expected to be there for me, that have never left me during this 12-year period. So faith, family, and friends are really what has gotten me through these last 12 years. I absolutely would. I think a lot of times I've developed friends through this cancer journey, people that have been either with the same disease I have or other types of cancer or illnesses that I've developed relationships with. You've got that commonality of you're going through similar circumstances. That's a great starting point to help develop a friendship, develop a relationship with other individuals where you can sort of bounce things off of each other. I'm having this issue. What are you having? How did you deal with this? And things like that. And I love having those people that I can talk to. I also love being a resource for those people. I have a friend of mine who has the exact same type of cancer that I had, appeared on the bottom of his foot as well. But he's only a few years into this. I'm 12 years into it. And so we can sort of compare notes about where he is at this point and where I was a few years into my journey and things like that. So absolutely, I would say having this disease, it has really gotten me a lot more friends than maybe if I hadn't gotten sick. Sure. So the book is called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And the book was really born out of two conversations. One was with a former basketball player that I had coached when I was coaching girls' high school basketball, who had moved to the area in the United States where my wife and I live, with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? And I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, and there is a reason, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media, and he asked me what I thought were the most important things that he should learn, not to just be successful in his job or in business, but to be successful in life. And Sapna, I didn't want to give him the get up early, work hard, help other, I didn't want to give him the cliches that we all know. So I spent some time taking some notes, and eventually I kind of had these 10 ideas, these 10 thoughts, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the months that I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the 10 principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be. And I'll give you just a couple of the principles that resonate with me. And one of them is one that I'm really not proud of, but I know I've done this in my life plenty of times. And the principle is this: most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their mind. And I know I've done that in my life. I know I've wanted to start something, a business or a project, and you kind of pull back and you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't have enough information, or what will people say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And I always tell, especially when I talk to young people, I always tell them if there's something in their heart, something in their soul that they believe they're supposed to do, but it scares them, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of their lives, the things they're going to regret are not going to be the things they did. They're going to be those things that they didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them. So that's one of the principles. The other principle that I'll talk about is you are the person that you're looking to become. You know, my first jobs were in business because it's what my dad wanted me to do. But I always felt I was supposed to be a police officer. I was supposed to be in law enforcement. And one of the things I'm most proud of in my life is I never let my dream die. You know, I could have said, hey, I'm a suit and tie hospital administrator. I'm making good money. I'm comfortable here. I'm going to stay here. But I gave all that up to become a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which by most accounts is pretty old to be getting into that line of work. But I knew it was in my heart. I knew it was something I was supposed to do. And that's why I say, you know, you are the person you're looking to become. You may not be doing that or in that yet, but you will be if you keep doing it. So think of yourself where you want to be, not necessarily think of yourself as where you are. So those are just two of the principles that I think are important and that I hope can help people live their uncommon and extraordinary life. Thank you. You know, I never wanted to write a book. I never expected to write a book. There's sort of an old joke that goes, when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God never told me to write a book or anything like that. But I think what God did was put people in my path that were making the same suggestion. Enough people kept saying, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I always say I wrote the book, but I think it was inspired by something much bigger than me. And I didn't know how to write a book. So I gave myself two rules. And the first rule was I will write a minimum of 1 page every day, Monday through Saturday. I was going to take Sunday off. And the other rule was I would not edit anything until I felt I had a first draft completed. And so there were days I would sit down at the computer and I would write absolute garbage, knowing this is terrible. This is never going to make it into a book. But then the next day I would write something better. And then maybe the next day I'd write something even better. And then I'd go back to writing garbage. It wasn't linear. It wasn't like a straight line that I just kept writing better. It was more like, you know, okay, I wrote good and then I wrote bad, and then I wrote good and then I wrote bad. And so it was very much an up and down struggle. And then I figured, well, once I had that first draft, I could always go back and be like, okay, that's not going to be in there. That's not going to be, that's terrible. No, this is good. Okay, that's terrible. No, this is good. It was basically of getting rid of the chaff, so to speak, the weeds, and keeping what I felt was good. And then it was a point where I wasn't sure if it was something that I should try to have published. And so I farmed it out to a few friends and I said, look, I need brutal honesty. I need you to tell me this is good, this is okay, this is the worst book you've ever read. Whatever it is, I need your honesty. I don't need you to sugarcoat this for me. I want to know the truth. And they all, to a person, said, yes, try to get this published. So I did. And here we are 4 years later, and now I'm working on a second book. You know, I really don't have any goals. I really just try to do whatever I'm doing the very best that I can, you know, and I always recommend that, especially to young people too. You know, I mean, if you spent, you know, $50,000 to get a college degree and your first job is making copies, be the best person that makes copies, you know, be the best at whatever you do. So I just try to do the best I can. And I try to keep myself open to working on different projects. I'm really good, or I'm getting good at saying no to people, because everybody seems to want a piece of you. I want you to be involved in this. I want you to be involved in that. There are some things I'm involved in, but I say no to more things than I say yes to, just because I know what I want to do. I want to write this second book, and I want it to be better than the first book. And I want to speak more in person with people. COVID shut down so much of the speaking part of it and things like that. So I know what I want to do. And I also know that there are some great projects that have been suggested to me that I'm involved in now, and also some great projects that were suggested that I ended up having to say no to just because they didn't fit with the timing of what I wanted to do. So from that perspective, I try to keep myself open and interested in things. My health, I really don't. I've been on a clinical trial drug now for the last 3 years. And by that, I mean, it's a trial. It's not available to the general public. And what this drug does for me is the way cancer proliferates in the body is it secretes an enzyme or a protein that hides itself from your own immune system. And all this drug does for me is go in and wipe out that protein or that enzyme so that my own immune system can recognize the cancer just like it recognizes a cold virus or a flu virus and say, you know what, that doesn't belong here. We need to attack it. So it's my own immune system that is keeping the tumors in my lungs stable. Now, I'm very fortunate because everybody that I started out on this trial with at the hospital where I get treated has died, has passed away. And so I am the last person standing. I don't know how long this is going to continue to work for me. And I don't know what else is left in the toolbox from my doctor to be able to help me if it doesn't work anymore. Again, those are things that are outside of my control. Those are things that I really have no say in. If they happen, I'll deal with them when they happen. But for right now, I'm doing what I love to do with people that I love to do it with. And for me, that's a pretty good life. I mean, it was hard because I had become friends with these people. I mean, we were in the lab in the mornings getting our blood work done. We were in the doctor's office at the same time. We were in the infusion center getting our treatments at the same time, waiting in the waiting room to be called back. We were comparing notes. How is this going for you? What's easier for you? How do you handle it when you go home and things like that? And then as they died individually, I watched their funerals. I wasn't able to go to their funerals, but I watched their funerals online. And I thought, well, I'm left behind now to tell their stories, to remember them and things like that. They always say that every human being dies twice. Once when their heart stops, and then the second time when the last person says their name or remembers them. So I'm going to remember them, and they're going to live on through me. And hopefully this drug can get to a point where, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but maybe in 5 years or 10 years, this drug can save somebody's life and they can have a life with their family beyond their disease and things like that. So I felt fortunate to have them on this journey with me. And as long as I'm alive, they will remain on this journey with me. I think it's the same message I have for everybody. And it's a line from a book called Farewell to Arms, written by one of the best American writers we've ever had in the United States by the name of Ernest Hemingway. And the line is this: life breaks everybody, and afterwards, many are stronger at the broken places. And I love that line. Life is going to beat us to our knees, no matter what we are or who we are in our life. We're going to have adversity. We're going to face difficult times in our life, and it's going to break us. But if you can learn from that, if you can overcome that adversity, if you can deal with it, you are going to be stronger after facing that adversity. Just like if you break your arm and they put it in a cast and it heals, your bone is going to be stronger at the place where it was initially broken. Same thing for life. Life is going to break you. But if you can get stronger, if you can get through that, you will be a stronger human being. And I love that line. It's just one sentence. That's all it is. Life breaks everyone, and afterwards, many are stronger at the broken places. Be that person who faces the adversity in your life, whatever it is. You lose somebody who's close to you, you get unexpectedly let go from your job, you find out you have a chronic or a terminal illness. We're all going to experience things like that. Use that to make you stronger. Use use that pain, use that difficulty. Instead of running from it, take it, flip it inside of you, burn it as fuel, use it as energy to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. It's caused me to be more vulnerable. You know, when you share your story, people are not stupid. They can figure out whether you're being phony or you're lying to them. So you have to present yourself warts and all, you know, good and bad. And so you realize that, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm not some Superman. I mean, Sapna, you're looking at me right now. There's no S on my chest. I do not have a cape and fly around like Superman. You know, I have hard times. I face difficult challenges and I don't deal with them very well sometimes. But then there are times when I do deal with them well. And that's just life. You know, life is not linear. Life is not a straight line. Life is up and down. Can you learn from the downs and apply them so that the ups are much better, are much more productive, are much happier for you? It's easy to stay in the downs. It's very easy and feel sorry for yourself and want other people to feel sorry for you. But I've found in my life that if I can use that adversity, if I can use that pain, if I can use that ugliness and learn from it, then my highs, my ups are much better. They're much happier. They're much more important in my life. I'll leave you with this story, and this is a true story. It happened back in the 1950s here at a university in the United States called Johns Hopkins University. And there was a professor there who did an experiment with rats. And he took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. They weren't just going to flunk a test or their business was going to go under. They were going to die. And the second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. That if we know we're doing the right things, there's no guarantee in life. Maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year. But at some point in time, you're going to either get to or come very close to what you're trying to do. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we all have a breaking point, but that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever give ourselves credit for. We quit, we give up, we give in because our brains are telling us, hey, this is uncomfortable. This hurts. I don't like the pain. Stop it. And we listen to our brains and we do that. When we know darn well we have more left in us. Marathon runners talk about how they hit a wall at a certain point in the marathon where they just don't think they can go on. But if they keep pushing, if they keep moving forward, just one step at a time, eventually they get that second wind, that second burst of energy. Be like that marathon runner. When you butt up against that wall where you don't think you can go on, just keep pushing through it. And it's amazing what you can do with your life. Sapna, thank you very much for having me on. I really enjoyed it. Well, thank you very much for saying that. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this coming out. And when it does, I'll put it up on all my social media links. Thank you very much for having me on. Have a good one. Bye-bye.